Welcome to the Mike Graham Show. This is going to be good because we're going to be doing this an awful lot, and we're going to be doing it very, very soon, an awful lot more. I'm Mike Graham, and I've got a plethora of guests today because we're going to talk about the budget. A week, of course, is a long time in politics, and over the weekend, you're going to be thinking about what on earth this government is doing, not only with their money, but with your money as well. And I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Mark Littlewood, former director of the Institute of Economic Affairs. Mark, very good morning to you.
Great to be with you, Mike.
Very good to see you. And Jamie Jenkins is here as well, our favourite statistician, who's down in Wales. He's going to be talking to us down the line. Let's talk about this budget, though, because we're a few days in, and we're now looking at what the kind of ramifications are, if you like, Mark, for, from your point of view, popular conservatism, your previous incarnation as Liz Truss's economic advisor. And we've got sort of two really rather bizarre situations going on. We've got the Labour government saying we're going to spy on you to see how much your house is worth. We might fly a drone over it to check out whether you've got, you know, a nice looking conservatory, or whether you've got a nice place to park your car, or maybe you've got park both cars. And we're also going to be checking out to see how far you're going to drive. If you've got an electric car, we're going to be, you know, putting some kind of spyware into your Tesla. I mean, what is going on?
Look, what they've done, Mike, what a mess. I mean, this is a car crash in fast motion, isn't it? What they've done is to desperately scrabble around down the back of the sofa to find absolutely anything they could tax, whilst they claim staying within their manifesto pledge that I think they've already broken. And you're right to highlight these two things, because they've proven on a spreadsheet that you can obviously raise money if you tax more valuable properties at a higher rate. And having encouraged everybody to get an electric vehicle, you're now going to be punished for it.
Of course.
What they haven't worked out is exactly how you're going to measure this, right? Because tax is supposed to be simple, uncontroversial, and easy to collect. Well, good luck working out which houses on a street are worth more than 2 million and which are worth just less than 2 million.
I mean, look, if you've got, say, for example, you go down to somewhere like Tunbridge Wells in Kent, where, you know, it's southeast of England, houses are quite expensive, more expensive than perhaps in the northeast, but cheaper than London. But if your neighbour, you know, Mr. Smith, has got a 4-bedroom house that could be worth 2 million quid, and you've got a 3-bedroom house that could be worth 1.5 million quid, who exactly is going to decide what that is?
Exactly right, and it's going to be highly contested, right? Just imagine you're on the cusp. You know, it's somewhere around 1.9, 2.1 million pounds, right? I mean, you know, nice thing to have, but just imagine you're on that cusp. You're going to fight tooth and nail to try and prove that your property is worth 1.99 million rather than 2.01 million. And you'll get valuations to try and prove that. It's even been suggested, I don't know this sounds ridiculous, but you can imagine it happening, that if you think you're just over 2 million, you might want to do some damage to your house. You know, smash up the conservatory, knock out the kitchen, whatever, concrete over the swimming pool or whatever.
Set fire to a bit of it or something,
exactly,
right?
just to get you below that 2 million threshold. So they haven't thought this through at all.
Maybe you set fire to your car at the same time.
Well, you may as well. And then on the electric vehicle stuff, so here was the plan, right? Having tried to force everybody into electric vehicles, you know, to save the planet or whatever, they're obviously now receiving less revenue from old-style petrol-based cars, so they want to charge you 3p a mile for your electric vehicle. Right. Who's going to measure this? Right? I mean, the initial idea was it would be sort of self-reporting. At the end of each year, you sort of write a note and put it into an honesty box about how many miles you've driven.
It's bizarre, isn't it? I mean, people don't live like that.
No,
you know,
madness.
This is a sort of bizarre kind of sixth form world that they all seem to inhabit. That, you know, everybody's really good and honourable, and, you know, how many miles did you drive this year? 2,000. Okay, so how much money do you owe us? It's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. So more likely, they will force everyone with an electric car to have an MOT, even if you don't need one, just to check the mileage every year. I mean, so the cost and complexity of collection of these taxes. And what they've just done is to say, well, we think it's going to raise this amount of revenue. Okay, but how much are you going to waste of that revenue on the collection mechanism of forcing everybody to do an MOT, to dealing with every last complaint, every appeal? So these are very ill thought through taxes. They make our tax code even more complicated. We've got the longest tax rule book in the world,
Yes.
Mike. It's about, I think it's now 16 times the length of War and Peace, and even more boring. So it's completely impossible to get your head around it. And all of this budget does is not just to raise our taxes, it makes the whole system even more complicated. So here's my prediction. The revenues that they claim they're going to raise, they won't raise anything like that amount. So guess what? Bad news. In a year's time, it will be Groundhog Day all over again. We'll still have a black hole, and Rachel Reeves, or more likely the new Chancellor of the Exchequer, will have to find more mechanisms of filling it. And what will they reach for? Yet more stupid taxes.
Yeah. And that seems to be the problem. Jamie Jenkins, let me come to you. You put out a whole series of different sort of graphics on the numbers, churning them as you like to do and as you do very well. The black hole that they said they inherited seems to be getting bigger and bigger by the day, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, she came in talking about this big black hole that she'd inherited, and then it's like they put some dynamite in a bigger hole and have blown the whole economy up, Mike. That's what it feels like. Because if you take the OBR forecast before the general election last year, and then you compare with what the government actually borrowed, say from August to September, since they've been in power, let's give them a month to sort, because they could have had an emergency budget if they thought the finances were that bad. They came in July, so let's look August to September. And the borrowing that the government's done is 92 billion more than what the OBR were forecasting. Now, there's two reasons for this. One could be the government's lost control of the finances, probably that. I was thinking at the time that's probably the main reason, but another reason could be that the OBR got it all wrong in the first place. And the fact they've managed to leak the budget as well looks that maybe the competence might get the OBR's all shot as well. But one thing we do know is when it comes to forecasts, they're generally going to be heading in the right direction, but they're not going to be spot on. So yeah, 92 billion pounds. So as Mark's talking about more and more taxes, the reason we're having more and more taxes is they've lost control of the finances. And just a couple of key facts of why we've lost 170,000 jobs since the general election. Younger people are being hit more in terms of the job losses. Now, why we lost more jobs? Jobs tax, tax more. They're going to leave. People aren't going to employ younger people. The minimum wage went up quite a lot as well for young people, in particular for the very youngest, which means there's a less incentive to give them that little job onto the ladder. Complete nonsense doing that. And then the economic figures on, we're not getting the growth that they promised us. In fact, the latest figures showed in September we've contracted in the economy, Mike. So more job losses, more benefits. And that's why we keep going back in to ask us for more money, for more taxes, is because they've lost control of the spending.
Yeah, because you put out a stat, Jamie, just the other day, saying that the UK economy shrunk once again in September, 0.1% down, third consecutive month of zero or negative growth. And that seems to be the big problem, doesn't it? Because all the economists that I'm listening to are saying the only way out of this terrible situation economically is growth. And there's no growth, and there's not likely to be any bleeding growth anytime soon, is there?
No, and if you keep putting taxes up, it just disincentivizes people to go to work in the first place. So you're not going to get a growth. You need entrepreneurs in the country to create those jobs. And if they leave, they're not going to be offering, roles to people in the economy. And the only thing that's propping up those really dire figures, Mike, as well, is that because the government borrowing's gone out of control, we're kind of borrowing to keep flat growth, which is very perverse. You need the private sector to be growing. It's basically what we're seeing is increases in kind of healthcare workers, public sector workers. Because if you take the overall job market, Mike, it's worse in the private sector just because the public sector is propping it up a bit. And people forget, I always have arguments with this when I talk about people who are in the public sector. And I say to them, well, you don't really pay tax. And say, well, I pay tax. It comes out of my wages. I said, yeah, there's a pot of money that the private sector needs to kind of generate. They pay the taxes. It goes to the government. And then they give you some money in your wages and you give a little bit back. You don't actually contribute net to the overall economy because you're not in the private sector. So that's the big conundrum that we have, Mike. Until you fix that problem. And the only way I think personally you're going to do that is to lower taxes. But I don't think Rachel Reeves went to that economics lesson, how that one works.
No, she understands it. Mark, Littlewood, back to you. They seem to be kind of stalled almost like rabbits in the headlights, where they don't understand business.
Yep.
We hear this from Nigel Farage and the Reform all the time, that there's nobody on the front bench of this government who's ever run a business. They don't seem to understand. They seem to think, and even Keir Starmer seems to think, that the way out of this mess is to invest, as he says, in the public sector, and suddenly that creates growth. It doesn't, does it?
No, of course it doesn't. And you'll remember, Mike, at the time of the general election in 2024 and just after, we were told by Starmer and Reeves that they were going to be laser focused.
Oh, yes.
Laser focused on growth. Growth is our number one priority. But the OBR's marking of the budget was there is not a single measure in it likely to improve economic growth. Rachel Reeves seems to be involved in some sort of rain dance, that she sort of thinks if she just wishes growth into existence or says the word growth enough, it will come about. You're right that they've lent into what they would call public sector investment, but is essentially just spending. You know, later on this evening, I'm thinking of investing in a Mars bar and a couple of pints of beer. That's not investment, that's spending, right? So they're not sort of building, you know, infrastructure or improving the...
No, and they talk about the NHS as though it's this kind of golden calf.
Yeah, it's spending.
Oh, we're going to spend another 400 million out of a budget of 200 billion. I mean, it's nothing at all. And they talk about, you know, he still goes on and on every time he gets a chance to say, oh, but we've created, you know, 5 million appointments. No, you haven't. I talk to people every day who say, I've had 3 appointments so far. I still haven't seen anyone because they keep getting cancelled.
Yes, exactly. So, here's an amazing thing, right? If economists like to measure productivity, because it's this that actually drives growth. And by productivity, what you're measuring is how much are you achieving in an hour of work, right? And generally speaking, if the world gets better and technology improves, you expect productivity to go up, right? It should be easier for doctors to meet patients now or conduct operations or whatever than it was 20 years ago. There has been no productivity growth in the public sector for a quarter of a century. And this is stunning if you actually consider the technological advances of the last sort of 25 years or so. You know, mobile phones were only just coming on stream 25 years ago. You know, the internet has improved enormously, yet no gains in productivity in the public sector. Reasonable gains in the private sector. But this government's approach is to continually take from the productive side of the economy, the private sector that generates jobs, generates growth, and give it to the unproductive side of the economy, that's to say the public sector. Well, if you keep down that path, be completely unsurprised when you get stagnation. And the other thing I'd say on tax, which I don't think this government has grasped at all, is my old friend Art Laffer, who came up with this concept of the Laffer curve, right? So the idea here is you might get to a point where you're taxing things so heavily that you're not maximising government revenue. That if you tax work so heavily, fewer jobs will be created, people might retire early, and that would be on the wrong side of the Laffer curve. And we've now probably got tax rates so high in a number of areas that if you have the courage to cut them back a bit, not only would you allow the private sector to breathe, but you get in more revenue to the Treasury because people would be happy to work more hours, to not retire early, to strive for that extra promotion. And this government seems wholly unaware that if you change the tax system, people change their behaviour. And if you punish work, investment and enterprise, you're going to get less of it. That's what's happening. And that's why we're in a doom loop. You raise taxes, that kills growth, therefore the debt and the deficit gets worse, and therefore you return to it, and if you again reach for the raise taxes lever, you make the situation worse. And I think we're just going to go round and round in circles here. There is no strategy, there is no plan to get growth. They don't seem to have the first idea about how growth is generated in the economy. They seem to have the arrogance to believe that the mere fact of them coming to office would be enough to give everybody a lift. Well, the opposite has happened.
Yeah, exactly right. And Jamie, I mean, I can give you 2 examples just in my own world, which is, you know, small, obviously. My son, who's at university at the moment in Manchester, does a little bit of sort of bar work up there in a place called the Ritz. He says since the last budget, they've already cut back on the hours that he gets. They've already cut back on the number of people who work in the venue, which is, you know, a music venue with, you know, 7 or 8 bars. So he's making about half of the money he used to make because they can't afford to keep paying on the national insurance addition. And now, of course, they're going to be even more squeezed because they've been told by Rachel Reeves that, you know, the minimum wage has got to go up. So they'll probably let even more people go and make it even more likely that my son will get fewer hours and less money going forward. And then I was speaking to another guy at the weekend who was a former prison guard who now works as a sort of a personal security consultant, and said he used to do a bit of nightclub work. He used to work on the doors. He said, but because of the way that they now tax that, it's not worth his while working. So they've sort of created a doom loop, as Mark says, for that kind of casual work that people used to be able to do to make ends meet and to actually raise a bit of money.
Oh, no, definitely. I know I talk kind of about the macro big numbers, but you're talking about the real human stories there, and that's ultimately what hides behind every single number. And what has been hit quite badly now with this jobs tax is a double whammy, really, Mike. Because what happens is when there's kind of low growth in the economy, taxes are going up, people have got low confidence in terms of going out to spend money. So there'll probably be fewer people going out to the bars anyway. So you've got the less money going into the tills for the people in hospitality, and more tax that needs to go out. And that's what we're seeing. When we look at those job losses, the 170,000 since the start of the election, hospitality is hit quite hard on that. People talk about AI replacing a lot of them, but the kind of roles that have been lost since the election are jobs that AI won't be replacing. And that's the critical thing. And the minimum wage going up is important. And I think when you look at the budget overall, they seem to find money, Mike, for certain things. Like, who would you trust more to spend the money to grow the economy? Rather than tax and take it out of hard-working Brits, leave them have the money to go and spend, generate, stimulate the economy. I trust people to spend the money more wisely than the government to spend the money, myself, basically, Mike. And did you see that in the budget as well? I think £1.8 billion being allocated for digital ID. Now, it's not we're in the manifesto. Right. That's 3 times what you would generate from this farmer's tax. So they had all these tractors down in Westminster basically protesting. They might get £500 million a year by FY30, the end of FY30 financial year there. £500 million, 3 times that on digital ID that nobody wants, was never voted for. What this government's up to, and I laugh at Mark when you were talking there about the cars and how are you going to know how many miles you've done? Well, the way this government's going, Mike, they'll probably in the next Parliament session, they'll say that everybody's going to have a black box in their car so we can track every mile you're doing.
Follow that one, But this is the thing. We'll come back to the farmers and the tractors because that's a good story that we need to talk about as to how this government treats its honest to goodness citizens. But let me talk to you about the OBR, Mark, because Jamie mentioned the OBR initially and said basically they don't really seem to know what they're doing. I mean, they were kind of discredited last year because they got everything wrong, and most of their forecasts turn out to be incorrect. And woe and behold, this year they managed to leak the entire budget literally an hour before. I mean, I'll never forget that great scene of Rachel Reeves sitting there. Somebody I think it was Torsten Bell, who handed her the phone, and she's kind of going,
the whole lot is out.
Christ. How much do they know? Oh, they know all of it. Yeah. The conspiracy theorists will say maybe they did it deliberately. I don't think they're that clever, right? But I mean, how could that have possibly happened?
It is truly shocking. I mean, for an organisation that has the word responsibility in its name, it's hard to work out a more irresponsible piece of behaviour, isn't it? So we can look at it, and obviously it kind of almost gives some light relief about how farcical it is that this could occur. But it's pretty damn serious, because this is very market sensitive information, right? I mean, I'm not suggesting it was anything other than negligence, but if you were at the OBR and you wanted to help a couple of your mates who are market traders, and therefore you slipped them a copy of the budget a bit earlier than the markets knew, I mean, millions can be made on that. I mean, it's highly sensitive information. So although I think we all revelled in Rachel Reeves and Torsten Bell's embarrassment sitting on the benches in the House of Commons, there's a bigger problem here. And typical of Britain's bureaucracy, when this is put to the head of the OBR, he apologises for the technical error.
Yes.
Well, it's a bit more than that, mate.
It is a bit.
It's a bit more.
This is Richard Hughes.
Richard Hughes. There's been a technical error. I mean, I'll say and some. I mean, what next? I suppose it is a technical error if you accidentally hand away the nuclear launch codes to someone. It's a technical error, but it's now right. Maybe this isn't on quite that scale, but not. This in terms of.
I mean, financially speaking, absolutely.
This is their most important document of the year. you would have thought you don't hand it over to some intern and say, you know, do you mind shoving that up at around noon? You would have thought you'd have a better protocol in place than that. And, you know, we've been promised this investigation into it. How long does it take to investigate what went wrong? We should have had an answer by now. So, I mean, it's just embarrassing. I mean, but
it just also shows up, doesn't it? This sort of paucity of what I would regard as responsibility, one, but also kind of moral guidance, which they talk about an awful lot in government, don't they? They talk about, you know, this is the right thing to do, and this is why we've done it. You know, and I saw a press conference with Richard Hughes where he was asked, you know, do you know what happened? And he went, well, it would be wrong for me to, you know, preempt the inquiry. Well, yeah, but do you know what happened? And he went, well, we understand what happened, but we need to look into it as to see whether anybody's responsible. And then it was like, well, are you going to resign?
10 minutes, right?
Are you going to resign? And this, again, you get this kind of sense that he's like, well, I'm only going to resign if somebody recommends it.
Right.
A bit like the BBC, you know.
Well, I'm happy to recommend it.
I'm happy to recommend it as well, you know. I mean, you've basically cocked up on a massive scale. You know, you should surely walk away. I mean, I said this on budget day. If I was Rachel Reeves, and I know people have said, oh, it's nothing to do with her, it's not her fault, it's not her department. Well, it kind of is. You know, she's in charge of the economy. You know, I would have resigned on Wednesday afternoon and just gone, look, we've delivered the budget, you know, we're happy with it, we stand over it, we give you all of our confidence that this will improve the economy, but because of what's happened today, under my watch, I'm going to now offer my resignation to the Prime Minister. Surely that's what she should have done.
Yeah, we've completely lost any sense of people's sort of public duty, haven't we? That resignation is, you know, like you cling on forever and a day. And if you were to go back, you know, to how we used to do things in politics, where people did take responsibility for errors, if you were to go back all the way to the 1947 budget, Hugh Dalton was the Labour Chancellor. And he made, you would probably say, a gaffe. I think he inadvertently, just before the budget, said something to a journalist that allowed the journalist to work out what might be in the budget. Clement Attlee, the Prime Minister, sacked him on the spot.
Right.
You know,
before the budget even was announced?
I think he presented it and then was fired, or resigned. I mean, and there was no doubt that this should lead to, you know, heads rolling. We've completely lost that in public life now, haven't we? Everybody points the finger at everybody else. Then we're told lessons will be learned. That, you know, an inquiry is looking into this, so you know, more lessons will be learned. I mean, this thing with the OBR, it is ridiculous. I mean, you don't need an inquiry as if it's sort of some unbelievably complex forensic crime scene. You should be able to work out in minutes what went wrong and explain publicly what went wrong. So you're right, Richard Hughes sort of saying, oh, well, I know what it is, but I don't want to preempt the inquiry. You should be able to get this done and dusted in 5, 10, 15 minutes. It's pathetic. Now, put aside that sort of level of technical incompetence, Mike. The OBR's not worth listening to in terms of its forecasting. I mean, you might as well throw darts at a darts board to get a blind drunk in order to generate a whole series of numbers. They are consistently over optimistic about growth and the state of the public finances. They're a bunch of witch doctors, really. You can't conceivably know to a decimal point what economic growth is going to be in 5 years' time. So they are pointless and incompetent. My view would be we shouldn't just get rid of Richard Hughes for the failure over the leak. You might as well shut them down. I want the Chancellor to listen to experts, but you don't need a whole separate body like this to advise the Chancellor.
And we'll come back to what happened to Liz Truss in a second. But Jamie, to you on that one. How do they manage? I mean, you're a statistician by trade. I mean, how do they manage to get it so wrong? Is it literally witch doctoring? Is it just kind of, you know, throwing a few pieces of paper up in the air and seeing where they land? I mean, what kind of methodology are these bozos using?
Yeah, it's not easier, you know, and I do agree with Mark. I don't think you need the OBR. The OBR was created, I think, by George Osborne. A lot of this work used to be done in the Treasury. They obviously have to work closely with the Treasury anyway when they do these, and they're probably optimistic because the OBR doesn't want to kind of have the government saying, oh, those numbers are a bit on the weak side, aren't they? So you may as well just put them in the Treasury back and get rid of the OBR because it's just basically double staffing. But basically what you're trying to do, Mike, when they publish tons and tons and tons of data, not just the headline numbers that you see where they'll forecast, you know, unemployment, they'll forecast migration. And a lot of it is just trending on what we've seen in recent years. So, if you take the migration forecast in the OBR, I think there's a few headlines out this week that the OBR are predicting that migration is going to go back up under the Labour government. They're not really predicting that. All they're doing is that they're looking at the ONS, who do separate numbers, and what their long-term net migration figure is, and they just plug that one in, which just happens to be a bit higher than the figures we've seen this week. And then people say, well, where's the ONS got that figure from? It's literally, let's just plug in this number, and this is what the number would look like if we have, say, 300,000 net migration. And then the ONS will do a higher number of net migration, a lower number. So, somebody said to me, is it all guesswork? There's some science behind it, but ultimately, Mike, it is a lot of guesswork. And that's pretty much why they kind of get it valued on. And on the point about what Mark was saying about market-sensitive data. So, yeah, the ONS, I used to work on market-sensitive data. So I'd be working closely with the guys doing the GDP figures. I was responsible for the labour market figures. If any of those got leaked out, somebody would have to resign on the back of that, because he's right. If you get a width for the economic growth is going to go down when the markets have bought in that it might be flat or growing, and there's a shock contraction, that has a significant impact on the markets. And people can make money if they got access to that. I think there's been investigations in the past when I was at the ONS where people have left statistical releases in the days where you'd have PDFs on people's tables, and people have picked them up and they've been booted out because of it. So leaking it on the internet, maybe that's a bit more transparent because we all had a bit of access to it. But something needs to happen, Mike. But I think just getting rid of the OBR, sticking it back in the Treasury, save a couple of pounds on the civil service bill might be the way to go.
I mean, that was the other more ridiculous thing of what happened on Wednesday when the OBR people said, Mark, it's okay, we've taken it down. And you're like, do you not understand how the internet works? Everybody's downloaded it. People were putting it out on Twitter. The entire budget was on Twitter, and Instagram and Facebook. The idea that they thought they could take it down and that would be the end of that. It just kind of shows how ludicrous they are. But let me ask you about, because you were involved very much with Liz Truss when she was Prime Minister. In terms of her economic strategy and all of that. How was she treated so differently by the markets, if you like, and by the kind of civil service and by those people in power at the Bank of England, where this lot, who have done far more economic damage, it seems to me, to the economy, are getting an easy ride? Yes.
Well, what went wrong, and you could either say it was unfortunate, or some people even believe it was conspiratorial, is that the Bank of England was asleep at the wheel, and there are a whole range of factors that all come together to determine how the markets are going to behave. And what was happening back then was that the era of ludicrously low interest rates was coming to an end, right? So we were bound to see interest rates rise, and that means, of course, the cost of government borrowing rises. The Bank of England didn't follow the US federal, the Fed in the US by increasing interest rates. And there's quite a complicated story here, but they were also completely asleep at the wheel, blind drunk at the wheel, when it came to a risk posed by something called liability-driven investments. That's to say we had vast amounts of investments that were wholly reliant on interest rates not going up. And the Bank of England, long after the event, long after Liz Truss had left office after her short 7 weeks in power, decided to do their own inquiry into what went wrong that caused all the market turmoil. And the Bank of England concluded in its own report that 2/3 of the market turmoil was down to the Bank of England. 2/3 of it. Yeah. Now, I don't know about you, but if somebody ever says to me, it's 2/3 my fault, I would think it's more likely it's 90% your fault if you're readily conceding that 2/3 of it was your fault.
In layman's terms, it's your fault.
Yeah, it's your fault, exactly. And no heads have rolled at the Bank of England. Why not? Andrew Bailey is still there. No, you have to go to dig through their website so we can find this document. No sign of an apology.
But is that then, in your view, an ideological problem, do you think?
Yes, I mean the other thing that she faced as well, Liz Truss, you can argue about whether she might have executed the strategy differently, but she sort of assumed that the Conservative MPs at the time would give her a fair crack of the whip. And if the markets start to get a sniff of political instability, that can cause turmoil as well. And unfortunately, it turned out that a very large chunk of Tory MPs were not up for cutting taxes and cutting spending. And then you get into this kind of vicious spiral of the markets start to think, oh, maybe the government isn't politically stable. Therefore, if the markets get spooked, the political stability increases because other MPs say, oh my God, the markets don't like the look of this. And it becomes a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think that's something that we should look. I mean, although the Labour government are, in my view, doing virtually all the wrong things, other than with the welfare reforms, they haven't been knocked sideways by their own MPs. But you know what? It might not be too long before they are knocked sideways by their MPs. And if the money markets start to think that Starmer and Reeves can't control their backbenches, that will cause panic in the markets, because however bad Starmer and Reeves are, generally speaking, the markets want tranquility and predictability. And if that starts to go sideways, we will see a pretty horrific reaction in the markets. So a whole range of things comes together. Liz Truss was unlucky, basically, but the Bank of England also threw her under a bus. And in our unfair world of politics, she had to take the rap, whereas the bureaucrats at the Bank of England carry on regardless and are still there. It's not a fair world, I'm afraid.
No, it's not. And Jamie, to you on the whole kind of popularity scenario in terms of statistics with Starmer and Reeves, I mean, there hasn't been a more unpopular Prime Minister in this country, I don't think, ever, than Keir Starmer. You know, he's absolutely detested by pretty much everyone. You know, his own party don't like him, the backbenchers don't like him, the left wing of the party don't like him, the right wing of the party don't like him, the voters don't like him. I mean, how is it possible that he's even still there?
Yeah, well, I think it's basically the makeup of the Labour Party and how they run. So if they had, like, well, the Tory Party had, which was that 1922 committee where the MPs could put some votes or no confidence, he'd probably be gone a long time ago, Mike. But the mechanism to try and get rid of Starmer is just not there. And they keep scrambling around thinking, well, who would we replace him with? And you know, if Andy Burnham's the answer, you've got to ask what the question is. And obviously he's not in Parliament, Mike. So they're now talking about Angela Rayner. Just imagine Angela Rayner as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. God help her. So historically, what you've tended to have is a very competent Chancellor alongside, you know, a Prime Minister would be the one would normally be touted as a potential Prime Minister. We obviously saw Gordon Brown replace Tony Blair. We had Sunak came in. I know it was after Truss, but replaced with Boris Johnson. But you know, Rachel Reeves has got absolutely no chance because she's probably less liked than the Starmer himself. So the good thing, Mike, for me with Starmer and Reeves is the longer they're in, whilst there's that damage that they're doing, which hopefully we can recover from, they're probably creating a position now where a Labour Party will never, ever get elected in my lifetime. So if that's the short-term pain for this long-term gain that we might have, I'm all for it.
Right, as Keir Starmer would say. I mean, he's today, as we speak, facing a growing backlash, apparently led by an ally of Angela Rayner's over this whole business of the sort of the rowback of the Workers' Rights Bill.
Yep.
Because there was going to be supposedly the right to be done to take your employer to court for unfair dismissal if you
on
don't
day
work
one.
there on day one. You know, if you got there in the morning at 9 o'clock
and you didn't like the look of them, you
set
sued.
fire to the office, and they went, "Sorry, you're out, mate," and you could sue them.
Yep.
I mean, incredible, right? But it's just, I'm still, like I just said to Jamie, I'm sort of completely baffled as to how Starmer's still there.
Yes. I mean, I suppose if we look across the long sweep of British political history, the Conservative Party seems to be almost addicted to assassinating its leaders, and the Labour Party has this kind of cloying loyalty far and beyond and longer than it should ever have that loyalty. You know, they stuck by Jeremy Corbyn through 2 general elections for crying out loud. And Jamie's right, the mechanism for removal is a bit more complex. So if Labour want to get rid of Starmer, and you would think that that day of destiny is not far away, wouldn't you? It would require 80 MPs to trigger a leadership contest. They'd have to find someone, could potentially be a stalking horse, get 80 of them to sign their nomination paper. That triggers a leadership election. But here's the problem that you get if you were thinking about, if you're a Labour MP with an ounce of common sense and wanted to bring some stability to the government. That triggers a leadership election. Great, so we now have, you know, potentially, 2 or 3 months of if Starmer was to defend his position, going round the country at hustings meetings in Grimsby and Eastbourne and Bournemouth and God knows what else, where and the Labour Party membership would then vote for the next leader of the Labour Party, who presumably the King would then appoint Prime Minister. And here's the thing. The Labour Party membership will probably vote for the most left-wing option on the ballot paper. So, look, I don't want in any way to suggest that I'm leaping to Keir Starmer's defence, but I'm almost clinging on to Nurse for fear of worse, right? I mean, if they dump him, I think there's going to be an even bigger leftward shift, because that's what the members of the Labour Party will vote for.
Well,
so
you heard the cheers going up, didn't you, when they announced the ending of the two-child benefit cap. And a lot of people have said, they should just rename themselves now the Benefits Party, because the only people who are going to benefit from this budget are people on benefits. Yes,
I mean, I think it's farcical to consider them the Workers' Party anymore. They are the Welfare Party, not the Workers' Party. They have also morphed into, which also potentially explains a lot of their rather mad behaviour, they've become almost exclusively a party of the public sector as well. Back in the day, they would represent working class people in the private sector of industry, and they'd say, well, we're on the side of the workers. The trade unions, and trade unions are now, look, there are trade unions in the private sector, but overwhelmingly trade unions are a public sector enterprise now. So they've become a public sector party insofar as they represent workers at all, and in large part a welfare party as well. So when you see every item of government expenditure cheered to the rafters, no wonder we are colossally in debt. There seems to be virtually nothing, I can't think of anything, that the Labour MPs seem to be willing to cut spending on. And we are spending like Topsy. We're living beyond our means. There is continual black holes appearing in the public finances. So this is the road to rack and ruin. And we have in place a government with a massive majority that represents the interests of those on welfare and the public sector workforce. That's not a good place to be.
No, it's not. And Jamie, I mean, in terms of the welfare spend, which is going up and up and up and up, there's a great deal of information coming in that an awful lot of the people who are going to benefit from this are people who were born outside of Britain, who have come here with loads and loads of kids, who will now be some thousands of pounds better off every single year. And it's just not sustainable, is it? I mean, you've basically got more and more people being given free money, supplied by fewer and fewer people who are actually paying tax.
Yeah, and the ONS published this week, Mike, the latest net migration figures, and they've come down from historical highs of the Boris wave that we've had, and we'll probably go into a bit more detail on that in a short while. But what you tend to have seen over the last 4 or 5 years is mass net migration into the country from non-EU countries. And when you then look at the ONS figures on, say, family composition and the number of children people have, it tends to be non-EU mothers who have more children over that, say, 2-child cap. So it would disproportionately benefit those individuals. And obviously, the more children you have, the less likely you are going out to work because you've got more children to look after at home. So it does disproportionately affect it. And that extra spend, Mike, we've got to come back to what did they do in the budget? That £26 billion tax hike that they put in, pretty much freezing all the income tax thresholds, where Rees will still argue, well, we haven't put the rates of tax up, but you're going to be creeping a lot more people in. And that is just unsustainable, Mike. And yeah, you're right to spot, and you bang on the money there, that giving this money, to people who got more children and taking it from people who are going out to work just disincentivizes. You might have somebody thinking, actually, rather than get a few extra hours in work, I'm just going to have another child. So can you get me pregnant to the husband? That's the mentality that we're kind of creating here. We do need more children, Mike, in the country overall. So will that encourage that? But the reason we need more children is because of the complete dire state of what's gone on over the last 25 years. Because if you go back to, say, 1997, Mike, the average wage to the house price was around 3 times. That's now, it's significantly higher. In some parts of the country, it's like 12 times more. So young people can't actually get on the housing ladder. They don't live together as early as before because they've got to stay to try and get on the housing ladder, which just means they have fewer children, it tends to be, because they don't live together younger. So that is the big problem. You can't have benefits Britain, Mike. You've got to get people working. And we haven't even started on the cost of the asylum system. And again, they've not got nothing in this budget to fix that at all.
But I mean, this net migration figure, which came down the most recent figure that we've seen down to sort of 250,000. The thing that I found interesting about that was that hardly anyone was talking about the reason why it's actually lower is not because there's fewer people coming into the country, it's because more people are leaving. 700,000 people, I think, or 750,000 people have left Britain.
Yeah, this is the yes, that's exactly right, Mike. And we've now got probably the worst of both ends of these numbers, right? So, you know, if the UK was a business, our business model seems to be this: let's kick out all of the millionaires and the bright young people who might be, you know, getting decent salaries. They can all sod off to Dubai or Singapore, wherever they're going. Meanwhile, we'll import people who, by and large, as a cohort, it's obviously generalisation klaxon here, aren't going to be high earners and are going to be reliant on welfare. That's our business model. That's how we're changing the demographics of the UK's population as a society. Well, I mean, that is not going to end well. And who can blame people, either those who have done, you know, perhaps in the later stages of their careers and done very well, have made a few million, or those who are just getting their careers underway and are aspiring to do well. What would keep you in Britain? And I mean, I love this country. You know, things would have to get incredibly bleak for me to leave, but I can completely see why people would say that the situation in the UK is now so adverse, and there are so many other countries in the world where my chances of advancement are greater. I'm out. So we are exporting, we are losing the people who get the economy motoring, pay the tax revenue, and we are importing a whole load of people who are tax eaters rather than tax givers, and we've got to flip that on its head. The asylum system is completely out of control now, utterly mismanaged, ludicrous in every dimension. I mean, the reason the whole hotel thing has crept up on us, Mike, is because we are ludicrously slow at processing these claims. I mean, we should be able to process an asylum claim in, I don't know, 18 days rather than 18 months. You would think. And, you know, 18 days more than enough, but it's taking 18 months. So if everybody who arrives is going to have 18 months to process their claim, and then God knows how many appeals, that's why they're filling up the hotels. So every part of the system is broken, and each broken part doubles down the problem on the next part of the system. And there doesn't seem to be any to deal with it, we've got to change the law. We've just got to simply make it easier to deport people. But there's no imagination at all, is there, about how we might house these people? I mean, how hard would it be to build an encampment that would, you know, basically civilised but rudimentary, in which to house, 40,000 asylum seekers who are presently filling in the hotels? I can't remember if I've told you before, Mike, but I've got a wizard wheeze to crack this. The total number of asylum seekers in hotels is almost exactly the same number of people who visit the Glastonbury Music Festival of a given day. So, given that Glastonbury has all of these refugee welcome signs, why don't we just take over that encampment and just put them there?
Use it all the year round.
Use it all year round.
And of course, one of the problems, Jamie, is not just, as Mark describes it, the people coming here to seek asylum, but the dependents and all of that. I mean, lots of people who come legally. Suddenly, I think we saw this week a figure of, you know, several 100,000 dependents coming in, which again is an indicator of expenditure by the government rather than income.
Yeah, so there's one positive in the migration figure. Like, so you're right to talk about these people leaving, and then an ONS, we had some revisions to some figures a few weeks back that, you know, staggering. Right, in the last 4 years, 1 million Brits have left the UK, and 1 million. Some have come back, so the net is a bit lower when you net off the two. But a million Brits have gone out. But so the figure that's come down that the ONS have published this week, which is this 204,000 net migration, it has come down because there are some elements of fewer people coming in, but that's nothing to do with Starmer or his government. Basically, it's where Sunak, they could see this Boris wave was getting so much kind of media attention. Yes. They put in some new restrictions on people with students and work visas, so they've come down. And you'd be right to call out the dependents. I think there are elements in the system that's cracking down on that, but the most remarkable kind of migration-related statistic of the week for me, Mike, was this whistleblower in the Home Office. I think we've written lower, saying that we've just lost 54,000 asylum seekers in the country. How would you lose 54,000 asylum seekers? So criminals in there. So people are in this country now, Mike. And what will the government probably come out and say if they admit to this number? Because I don't think they've confirmed nor denied this number. They'll probably come out and say what Rachel Reeves said in the budget. Well, digital ID will fix all of this. So let's get digital ID in tomorrow, Mike, and these 54,000 will all suddenly reappear in the country. It's absolute nonsense. The only thing you can do, I think, the Rwanda scheme, it had some challenges, and Mark's right to point out the legal system. You do need to get that sorted and probably leave the ECHR. As soon as somebody comes, you fly them out somewhere else, and then they think, well, I'm not going to land in Britain. Because what happens now, Mike, is it seems to be with this whistleblower that, okay, you go through this long-winded process of going through the system, and if they just reject you in the end, I'll just go and vanish. So you don't get, so it's absolute mental, Mike. That's the big thing for me. How can you lose 54,000 people?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a bit like the OBR, a bit like the Home Office, a bit like the NHS, a bit like the justice system, which David Lammy doesn't seem to know what to do about.
Other than the Boris jury trial.
Well, yeah, except he's now talking about reversing that, because that's what he used to think.
Yeah.
Department of Foreign Affairs, Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs, also not fit for purpose. I mean, there's nothing really that works at all. And a final word, really, as we come maybe to the end of this very interesting conversation, on the farmers, the people who actually make the food that we eat, who came up to London, despite the fact that they were told the night before, don't come to London, even though we've given you permission to come to London by the Metropolitan Police. And suddenly they start getting arrested for literally being farmers. You kind of going, sorry, what are you arresting me for?
Yeah. Well, they should have, if they'd sung a few pro-Palestinian songs, I'm sure they would have been left alone,
a couple of Palestinian flags on the tractors, you know.
I mean, the whole thing over the farmers stuff, I mean, it's a tragic and unforgivable tale, really, isn't it? Because none of this was flagged up before the election.
No.
So, you had no forewarning that this was going to come and hit you. It is a devastating blow to this sector of the economy. It's going to put a lot of them out of business. It's going to potentially end the concept of the family farm in a good number of areas. And for precious little gain.
Right.
That's the thing.
Yeah,
right?
like a tiny
if you
amount
said,
of money.
sorry, we've got to do this, but if we do it, we're going to balance the books and, we'll all be on our way. It's a tiny, tiny amount of money. And obviously, a huge political backlash, but also likely to cause real damage to the sector. So what's really remarkable about this government, and I knew I wouldn't like much of what it was going to do, but I thought that they would actually carry out whatever it was they were going to do with some degree of competence.
Yes.
But they can't. They are incompetent at picking a fight, giving any form of rationale, deciding, is it worth the candle to hit the farmers this hard? Every judgment appears to be a misjudgment on any rational political or economic basis.
And also, as I've said to you before, it's almost as though nobody's thinking it through.
Yeah.
It's like, if you and I were sitting in a room together and you said, look, here's what I'm thinking about doing. What do you make of it?
Yeah.
And people, you would think in some way, shape or form would go, well, this is where the consequences could be. This is where it could lead you into a battle. Nobody seems to be doing that.
Nothing is road tested. Nothing is red teamed. Errors are continually being made. And, there is a vast amount of wishful thinking going on in both the Treasury and Number 10. And, wishful thinking sometimes gets you through the day, but it doesn't get you through the year.
No. Exactly right. And Jamie, back to you. Bridget Phillipson apparently just today is kind of referring to millions and billions of pounds missing in a black hole as kind of just, I think, what was the phrase?
She said, don't worry, we'll find it in overall government expenditure.
Well,
As if there's £6 billion down the back of a sofa somewhere.
It's like they're running a sort of, a church fair. And hoping to collect enough money when the people come in from, the sort of cash in their pockets.
On the tombola.
Yeah, to keep the lights on. I mean, it's bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, and 6 billion in kind of context to what Mark said, that whole farmers thing, $500 million a year. So 6 billion, why they've gone after the farmers, the winter fuel allowance, that's not even nowhere near 6 billion as well. So ultimately, Mike, when you think of government, it's a popularity contest. You go to the polls and the most popular government will get elected. But this government's taken on the farmers, so they've lost them. They took on the pensioners. And what they've done this week, they've taken on the workers. So the only people that's going to be left to go and vote for them are people on benefits. And I bet half of those don't even bother voting in the first place anyway.
We're the only people left in the country by the time of the next election, right? Maybe it's a masterstroke.
Yeah. Maybe this is sort of year zero. Just start again.
Yeah.
Final question to you, Mark. Quite a good week for Kemi Badenoch for the first time in a while.
Yeah.
She was brilliant, I thought, against Rachel Reeves on Wednesday. Is there any hope? I saw a council election result yesterday where Tory vote was down to something like 2.3%. I mean, just dreadful. Any hope for them?
I mean, there's always hope, I think. I mean, and you're right, Kemi's performance at the budget was blisteringly good, really, really excellent. And I thought we were going to see that sort of stuff from her every day, that she would be coming out swinging, swinging every single day. And, sometimes her punches might not land, but at least she'd be, throwing a punch. And I think that it's recognised now that in the early stages of her leadership, she probably spent a bit too long behind closed doors thinking and planning things. So the party's in a pretty grim state. I mean, I actually did see an opinion poll recently that put the Conservatives in second, but way behind Reform, right? So the stage has been cleared for Farage, right, who I think, and Reform, who have an opportunity and a challenge here, right? Because the last Conservative government ended in failure and was brutally kicked out. The British electorate said, well, let's change the management and see if that gets any better. Well, the new management's coming and it's worse. So I think more and more people are thinking, you know what, we've got to change the system. It's not enough just to shuffle around who the Prime Minister is and who the Chancellor is and to worry about whether they've got a red rosette or a blue rosette. Britain needs a complete reset. And we've got to restore Britain to sort of what it used to be 20, 30 years ago. We've gone completely off the rails. And Farage and Reform chime with that sentiment rather more than Kemi and the Conservatives do at the moment. So you can be great across the dispatch box, you can make some really good economic arguments, but I think really to lead the Conservative Party back, she's going to have to be a little less technocratic and a little broader in her vision that Britain needs an enormous restoration, not just better management of our spreadsheets in the Treasury.
Okay. And Jamie, I mean, you specialise in looking at actual facts and statistics, but I mean, if you were to throw it forward with, your sort of hindsight, if you like, what would you say could go wrong for Nigel Farage between now and, say, the next general election?
Yeah, well, we've got the Scottish and the Welsh elections next year. There's more chance, I think, of them getting a much more control of the Senate than they would in the kind of the Scottish Parliament. But the way that the system's going to be run for the Reform, there's going to be less. The Conservative Party's vote kind of tanked, so it's likely that you might end up with kind of a Plaid Cymru, that's the nationalists in Wales, with the Labour Party in a coalition to try and keep Reform out. So they could be the largest party in Wales, but they don't get in. I think the big challenge for Reform is keeping that momentum going now up into the next general election. People say, well, we might get one next year. I just can't see why Starmer would call a general election at all, because they're so low in the polls. He's not going to win it. So this is his last chance just to hang on to power. And so I think, and then on the Tory party, Mike, I think ultimately there's probably no need to have the room for the Reform Party and the Tory party. Maybe if the Reform lot had basically been welcomed into the Tory party and Nigel was welcomed in about 18 months ago, he may be the leader now of the Tory party, and that right-sided vote would all come together. If they're going to keep with the traditional Conservatives and Reform, I only see the Conservative Party vote ever coming back where, say, a Reform government gets in, and then people just generally like change, maybe 10, 15 years to think, oh, we're fed up with Reform now, and we've got some emerging threat from the Conservatives. I don't think the Conservatives got any chance. The big worry, I think, will still be, when you look at the polls, there's still people who are choosing to vote Conservative in a poll and not Reform. So if they can win some of those over, it will help. But that's going to be the big challenge. As long as there's Reform and Conservatives on the ballot, that's going to split the vote on the right, I think.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed, Mark Littlewood. I'll maybe ask you one more thing just before we let you go. Plank of the week. Got to be Richard Hughes, isn't it, from the OBR?
I think it has got to be Richard Hughes from the OBR, yeah. And And you know, I mean, and my God, I mean, how you can sort of snatch the Plank of the Week trophy away from Rachel Reeves after this week, that takes some doing. So I mean, you know, that is a real, you know, that is a major Plank of the Week thing. And it wasn't just the screw up; it was the press conference afterwards, which looked like a hostage situation, right? Everything has been completely mishandled there, and he's going to do what every bureaucrat does. He's going to go to ground and hope that everybody forgets about it and the inquiry takes as long as possible. But big hat tip to Richard Hughes. You had to go some to beat Rachel Reeves' Plank of the Week this week, and my God, my friends, you pulled it off. Well done, you.
Jamie, got any other nominations?
You got to. I know we've had a big domination of the budget, Mike, but any week you can probably, as long as he starts talking, you've got to throw David Lammy in, haven't you? And to come out talking about getting rid of juries, where there's all the funny thing with that one was that all these clips then start coming out of when he was saying a few years ago how juries are so important, and ultimately, so to come out and do that, I question, Mike, with this government. Just a final thought on that: who's actually running the Labour government? Is this Starmer? Because Tony Blair's the guy behind digital ID, you know, his institute. He tried to get ID cards back in the day. Tony Blair tried to get rid of jurors on many trials back in the day as well. So is Tony Blair running the government? And basically, who knows what's going on? But you've got to chuck Lammy in any week as a nomination, Mike, you know, when he starts talking.
Jamie, great to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Mark Littlewood, thank you very much.
Been a pleasure,
See
Mike.
you again soon. We'll see you again very shortly. This is what we're going to be doing. We're doing loads of it. So keep subscribing, of course, to themikegrahamshow.com. Follow us on YouTube as well, where we've got a new channel, The Mike Graham Show. We'll see you soon.